For the Cult Mechanicus, the human body is a liability. It sickens, tires, and decays. To achieve divine perfection, the priests of Mars actively peel away their own biology, replacing weak organic tissue with synthetic logic conduits and cold steel. This theology shaped their entire world. By the 30th millennium, Mars operated as a single, sprawling industrial organism. Its hive cities and manufactorums were interlocked cogs in a planet-wide factory, governed entirely by strict computational logic and rigid production quotas. This extreme engineering was born of necessity. During the ancient age of strife, the artificial atmosphere of Mars burned away. The surface was left completely exposed to intense solar flares and frequent dust storms. To step outside without a life support suit or heavy cybernetic shielding was a rapid death sentence. You cannot survive in a highly radioactive, toxic desert by relying on emotion or unpredictability. The Martian environment demanded absolute, flawless obedience to mechanical order. Over centuries, this survival imperative mutated into a strict religious orthodoxy, where biological variance was practically a crime. When the Emperor of Mankind arrived to unite humanity, he struck a pragmatic bargain with this logic-driven society. Through the Treaty of Olympus, Mars formally allied with Terra, pledging to manufacture the weapons, the heavy armor, and the massive starships required to supply the Emperor's growing Imperium. The Emperor effectively relegated Mars to the status of a munitions depot, strictly policing their laboratories for signs of artificial intelligence or warp experimentation. This one-sided arrangement stripped away the Mechanicum's intellectual sovereignty. No one felt this resentment more sharply than Fabricator-General Kelbor-Hal. As the supreme ruler of Mars, Kelbor-Hal had replaced more than 80% of his organic brain with synthetic synapses. He viewed himself as a pinnacle of pure logic, yet his frustration with the Emperor's arbitrary restrictions exposed a towering, deeply human hubris. When Warmaster Horus initiated his rebellion against the Emperor, his emissary Regulus targeted that exact vulnerability. Regulus offered Kelbor-Hal complete autonomy and lifted all bans on forbidden research. He promised access to lost standard template constructs and the freedom to pursue any technological extreme, asking only for the Mechanicum's military allegiance in return. A calculating, bureaucratic compromise fueled by Kelbor-Hal's own hubris triggered the disintegration of the galaxy's most logical society. To cement this dark bargain, Horus provided the cryptographic keys to the vaults of Moravac. These shielded repositories, buried deep beneath Olympus Mons, had been sealed by the Emperor centuries prior. Kelbor-Hal used the Warmaster's codes and ordered the vault doors opened. Inside, Kelbor-Hal found the legacy of Primus Moravac, a catalog of weapons and logic engines fused with the predatory entities of the warp. Breaking the seal unleashed the Lingua Diabolis, or scrap code. This was a sentient, warp-infused digital cancer. It surged into the Martian data networks, actively hunting through trillions of kilometers of fiber optics and cogitator banks, preying directly on deterministic software. The digital infection rapidly manifested in the physical world. Automated assembly lines seized up. Cogitators bashed against their containment walls like trapped animals. In the northern polar basin, chemical refineries deliberately opened their pressure valves, flooding workers' habitats with methyl isocyanate and hydrogen cyanide gas. This chart maps the Great Schiaparelli repository on the Acidalia Planitia. When the scrap code breached these nodes, 20,000 years of accumulated human wisdom, carefully catalogued since the dawn of spaceflight, disintegrated into howling nonsense in a matter of minutes. This cataclysm became known as the death of innocence. The Mechanicum had built the most sophisticated firewalls and logical defense networks in human history, but strict mathematical boundaries offer absolutely no protection against malware powered by supernatural malice. The corruption didn't stop at facility infrastructure. Because the tech priests and servitors of Mars were deeply hardwired into the planet's data streams, the scrap code infected their neuroaugmentics. Synthetic synapses were overridden, and the minds of thousands of workers were shattered as their own mechanical limbs forcibly twisted them into violent, uncontrollable puppets. A handful of loyalist forges survived the initial wave only because they had adopted the noosphere. Developed by adept Zeth, this was a wireless information transfer system that utilized the warp as a carrier signal, completely bypassing the hard-lined copper and optical cables where the scrap code was spreading. Denied total control of the network, the infected forces abandoned digital infiltration. The traitor tech priests mobilized their remaining uncorrupted physical assets, launching a coordinated, planet-wide military assault against surviving loyalist strongholds. The Schism of Mars had begun. The conflict quickly escalated into total engine war. Entire legions of Titans, city-sized, heavily armed mechanical walkers, were deployed against one another. Corrupted god engines from Legio Mortis clashed with loyalist defenders, firing massive energy weapons that reduced continent-spanning manufactorums to molten slag. The ideological purge consumes the planet's industrial heart, incinerating millennia of human achievement to settle a religious dispute. Despite desperate defensive stands, the Loyalists could not hold Mars against the endless tide of corrupted machines. The surviving forces were forced to evacuate to Terra with whatever arms and armor they could carry, leaving the Imperium to establish a massive naval blockade around the Red Planet. The victors of the Civil War formally became the Dark Mechanicum. Completely unshackled from imperial law and basic morality, these renegade magi began mass-producing abominations. They fused mechanical frames with living tissue and demonic entities, creating lethal weapons of war powered by literal chaos. They held Mars for the duration of the Horus heresy, pumping out endless waves of war machines for the traitor armies. It was only after Horus was defeated that imperial forces reclaimed the planet, forcing Kelbor-Hal and his surviving dark disciples to flee into the swirling madness of the Eye of Terror. The survivors carried the trauma of this collapse into their new identity. This fear of innovation transformed the priesthood into the Adeptus Mechanicus, a culture that spent the next 10,000 years obsessively policing every line of code for signs of corruption. Kelbor-Hal believed that discarding his humanity and opening the vaults of Moravec would lead his people to a state of supreme logical perfection. By trying to mathematically calculate their way to godhood, the Mechanicum unwittingly engineered their own descent into a chaotic, flesh and steel nightmare.